convinced that the National Party have fully come to grips with the fact that they are in government. Because listening to the speakers from the government benches this afternoon, you would think they were still in opposition. They have not got the ability to actually talk about the budget that we are supposed to be debating this afternoon. We've just had something from Mr Joyce which spent, I'd say, 6 or 7 minutes talking about the previous Labour government and trying to create this sort of mythology about what the Labour Party is all about. He couldn't tell us what the National Party believes in or what the National Party has in the way of a plan for New Zealand, because there is no plan. Instead, he spent the bulk of his speech talking about the Labour Party and what the Labour Party did when they were in government before 2008. Jonathan Coleman, well, he just lowered himself to personal abuse. He just kind of looked along the ranks of who was here on the opposition benches and thought that he'd have a crack. He talked about Phil Goff for most of his speech. Then he had a go at my colleague Grant Robertson. Then he had a go at me. He reckoned that I didn't have a chance of winning my electorate. Well, I tell you what, Mr Speaker, my first decision for the campaign in the next election will be to make sure I don't employ Jonathan Coleman as my campaign manager. That's for sure. I won't have the maestro in charge of my campaign, that's for sure. Melissa Lee tried that, and look where that got her. But and then of course we had Colin King. I'm not quite, to be honest, I don't think any of us were quite sure what Colin King was on about because he put us all to sleep. Paul Quinn did his best to stay awake and to look enthusiastic. But there was a couple of things that caught my attention when Colin King was talking. He went on about what a wonderful thing this government was doing for research and development. Well, isn't that just part of the big tax swindle, the big swindle that this budget is about? Because last budget, they took away the Fast Forward Fund, they took away everything that Labour was doing, and then a year later they said, oh, you can have maybe half of it back. You can have half of it back, and that's the national government's big investment in research and development. The only other thing that caught my attention in Colin King's speech was the Great New Zealand Sheep Revolution. I had visions of in fact, there's a great movie called Black Sheep about genetically engineered sheep that sort of try to take over the farm and turn into were sheep. That was the vision I had of the great sheep revolution rising up against this government. But it's no surprise whatsoever that this government doesn't want to talk about this budget, because this budget of broken promises whacks just about everybody in New Zealand. It whacks low-income earners. It whacks Māori. It whacks the unemployed. It absolutely wallops most people in this country. And the biggest swindle in this budget is the fact that the people who are getting absolutely thumped are middle-income, hard-working New Zealand families. This government is trying to tell them that they are going to get something fantastic out of the miserly tax cuts that they receive. It has given a little with one hand, but it takes so much more away with the other. And it's fine for the few who are wealthy, who are doing fine, who are getting by okay, because they get to feast at the tax cut table. They get the bulk of the tax cuts. Well, the member says, what do I get in the way of tax cuts? It's the same as that member gets. It's the same as that member gets. And he gets more, does he? Oh, okay. Oh, right. Okay, yes, of course. Well, look, the thing is, that member would agree that he was doing just fine before the budget, and he's going to be doing a whole lot better after the budget, courtesy of what this government is doing. They give with one hand and they take away with the other. And it's fine for those who are feasting at the table. But the people who could really do with the tax cuts, the battlers, the workers, the families, all they get to do is gather the crumbs from underneath Bill English's seat. But the truth is, the government doesn't even want most hard-working families to have the scraps. That's the truth, because what have they done? They've increased GST so they can take some of it back. And of course, GST applies to everybody. Everybody will have to pay more GST. But if you've already got a lamb dinner and somebody plonks down a roast chicken in front of you, you wouldn't be too concerned if Bill English came along and nicked off with a leg or a wing. That's not so much of a problem. But on the other hand, if all you're getting is the crumbs, if all you get is a couple of peas off Jerry Brownlee's plate, and then they come along and take those peas away from you. Well, it's true, Jerry probably wouldn't drop too much, but if all you got was the crumbs and then that's taken away from you, then that's a really big deal. And that's what this government is doing to working families. It's giving with one hand and taking away far more with the other, and then they say, well, don't be jealous. Don't be jealous if it doesn't seem quite right, if those who are already well off are getting much more than you. And of course, it's not just GST that will obliterate the miserly tax cuts that the hard-working Kiwis will receive. High inflation, high mortgage rates, increased rents, ACC hikes. Each of those takes a little bit more out of the back pocket each week, and what Kiwi families will find is that they are actually going to end up far worse off as a result of this budget. When you take that all into consideration, it quickly becomes obvious just how much of a swindle this budget is. And of course, heaven forbid that you would be foolish enough to have children. Because if you've got children, particularly young children, then if Kiwi families out there, not just you, Mr. Speaker, but other Kiwi families out there have got children, then heaven forbid, because you're going to have that tax cut whipped away in one go. Because if families have got children in early childhood education, then the entire tax cut pretty much that they are likely to get is going to be whipped away, because here's another one of the government's broken promises. They weren't going to fiddle with the 20 hours free early childhood education, but what have we seen? Over $250 million worth of cuts, and that will result in higher costs for working families with young children. And depending on what type of service your kids are in, whether it's in education centre, whether it's in the kindy, kohanga, it varies, but you're looking at $23 to $31 a week. That really is the whole tax cut wiped out in one go. Never mind the inflation, the GST and everything else that's going to be added on. That's it, all gone in one go. And of course, what is this all about from the government's point of view? Well, it's about quantity and not quality. They want to diminish the quality of early childhood education, dumbing down our children and dumbing down their opportunities in the future. Well, I can tell you what, Mr. Speaker, that's not good enough for my kids, and I don't think it's good enough for anybody else's kids either. But it's not just education, because people in my electorate are asking me what on earth is going on in the health sector. Because Tony Ryle got up the other day and told us in the House that the health budget is larger than it's ever been. And there's more money in health than ever. And yet in my electorate, the District Health Board is looking at cutting district nursing services, particularly those that provide palliative care to people who want to die with dignity in their own homes. Those are going to be cut. Sexual health services and diabetes services, the public health services, those are going to be cut. Rehabilitation services, those are going to be cut. And I get, Mr. Speaker, emails and letters every day. At my last count for today, before I came down to the House, I'd had a dozen today from concerned constituents saying, what on earth is this government doing to our health sector? What is going on at our hospital? So what really is going on? Cuts. That's what's going on. And when we bury down and look at the supposed increases in funding that this government is giving, well, yes, they've increased the budget a bit, but they needed to increase the budget by 5% just to stand still. Just to stand still, they needed an increase in 5%. And that's what the Labour government, if we're going to talk about what the Labour government did before 2008, that's what the Labour government did. It made sure the increases were enough to cover at the very least the current services, and if not, increase them. But this government has given, at best, a 3.5% increase. And that is not enough for the health sector to stand still, and that is why this budget is delivering cuts to frontline services. Another broken promise from this government. Mr. Speaker, this budget is quite simply an unfair swindle that hammers hard-working Kiwi families in the back pocket, and then it tries to pull the wool over their eyes and tell them that they are going to be better off. Well, I tell you what, Mr. Speaker, the people are wise to what this government is doing. They are figuring out what this government is doing, and it is going to burn this government in the long run.